We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Meeny, meeny, tekel upharsin. That's what the invisible hand wrote on the wall in the book of Daniel. You've been weighed and measured and found wanting, and your kingdom will be torn asunder. Well, is such writing on the wall for President Joe Biden as he now has to face American voters with an actual track record in office in the run-up to 2024? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we talk Joe Biden's announcement, what this means for him, what it means for VP Kamala Harris, and what it means for the American public. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Evergreen, Alabama on WNWF 1470 AM and WPNS on 1140 AM. Thanks for being here. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio with Tim Donner, continuing our analysis of Biden's 2024 announcement. Now, Tim, any election is, of course, always about the numbers. So what do the polls tell us on America's feeling regarding Joe Biden and a potential second term?
Well, let's go back to 2020-21 and Trump's loss and his protestations, his legal actions, his claims. And then January 6th happened. And I think there was a sense across the country that, Trump was finished. There was no way he was going to be able to come back even if he tried. So it's really remarkable, Mark, that here we are just 2 years and 3 months later, and Donald Trump is ahead of Joe Biden in 3 of the 4 most recent polls conducted by credible organizations. He's up 7, Donald Trump is, against Biden and Rasmussen. He's up 5 points in the Harvard-Harris poll. And he's also up in the YouGov poll. So he is more than a point ahead on average, according to Real Clear Politics. I think that's as much a statement about Joe Biden, really, as it is about Donald Trump, because Biden is at an unelectable approval level right now. He's at 42.8%. No president has ever been reelected with approval numbers that low. You can go back to Jimmy Carter. You can go back to George H.W. Bush. You can go back to Trump, and you look at their approval numbers, they were not reelect numbers, and that's where Biden is. But he's hoping that he can scare the people out of another term of Trump, assuming Trump is the nominee. And he's utterly convinced, Mark, especially since he already finished ahead of Trump once, that he can do it again. And he can convince his party that he's the only one that can do it.
I think that's what it's going to come down to, is whether he can convince his voters that he can beat Trump again. Because, sure, he spent so much time in the basement in Delaware during the first campaign. He doesn't have that excuse anymore. And, I mean, Tim, campaigning. You have been a United States Senate candidate. And so you know what a physical toll it takes on an individual actually getting out there and doing campaigning. And I just don't think Joe Biden's up for it. I don't think he has the energy or the spirit to do it.
Well, he's got some major disadvantages that he didn't have in 2020, or I might say he no longer is able to exploit the radical disadvantages that Donald Trump had trying to fix a pandemic which hadn't happened in 100 years. No matter what Trump did, as soon as one person died, Joe Biden was going to stand in the cheap seats on the sidelines and blame it. That was easy to do. He could attack the unemployment
Tim, could I just interrupt you on that point? I remember Joe Biden saying, and he pointed out a specific number of deaths that had taken place due to COVID under Donald Trump, and he said, no man with this many deaths under his belt, words to this effect, deserves to be president. And since then, there have been more than under Donald Trump, under his leadership.
Well, the
But
point
of
is
course, nobody wants to remind him of that, right?
well, that was the most bizarre election of our lifetimes because of the pandemic, which completely changed the narrative. I think Trump was clearly on a track to be reelected because of the strength of the economy. We were at peace and had prosperity. Then the pandemic changed everything. Joe Biden was able to exploit it. The pandemic was the greatest gift Joe Biden could ever have received because he could, he could blame Trump for the 20% unemployment rate, for the hundreds of thousands of deaths with no responsibility of his own. Right. He had nothing he had to do. Now, 4 years later, he has no pandemic to fall back on. He has no excuse to be in his basement. Right. And he's going to have to come out and take the fight to Trump because his whole raison d'etre, as he said, even in his reelect announcement on video, was the threat of extreme MAGA fascism, essentially, that don't look at me, look at the alternative, and you'll see that I look that much better.
Tim, I think that's such a funny point you make there, because there's and I'm going to come back to this poll as well. I think it was the NBC poll that came out this week, and it was and it asked it was 1,000 people in the poll. 800 I think were likely voters, 200 just registered voters, so 1,000 in total. And it was one of the questions was, which group do you have the more positive opinion of? Democrats, Republicans, MAGA movement. And it was MAGA movement that had a more favorable response than either of the other two.
Is that right?
That is right.
That's incredible.
Now, also with that poll, there's something that I think is really important, because sometimes it's really hard to find consistency across polls. But there's one aspect that definitely was, and that's those voters who definitely, quote, definitely want Joe Biden to run again in 2024. And that was just 26% in the NBC poll. Now, oddly enough, just a week prior to that, the Associated Press, I think it was also in association with NORC, they also found just 26% definitely want Joe Biden to run again. Now, 26% definitely.
That's just his immediate family.
That's a death knell, isn't it, Tim? I mean, voter enthusiasm be damned, right?
True. Let's go back again to the state of Donald Trump on January 7th, 2021. And to look at where we've come since then, the fact that more people don't want Biden to run than the number that don't want Trump to run. Okay, there's close to 50,
I think it was 41% want Donald Trump to definitely run again. 41%.
Right, that's it. So that's a 59% don't want him to run again, and yet Biden even exceeds that. So what this really says is the country is desperate for something other than a rematch of Biden versus Trump. Neither guy. I mean, people would prefer Gavin Newsom versus Ron DeSantis, to put it another way. The next generation. I think people think that it's time for a new generation of leaders, which is what DeSantis has going for him. But Ron DeSantis is getting absolutely no momentum at this point because everything is behind Trump because he's been martyred by his indictment. And so Republicans are coming to his defense. And even those who will oppose him in the Republican primary have to come to Trump's defense because of the trumped up charges ginned up by the Democrats against him.
We'll be talking more about this Rumble in the Jungle, Thriller in Manila, Trump v. Biden 2024 later in the show. After this short break, we're coming back talking about Joe Biden's first term and how well he can leverage that into a 2024 bid. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's
I'm
Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.